in public school. Oh, excuse me, guys. It looks like we are recording this. Okay. I was raised with oral listening and spoken language. My family did not learn sign language, and I was the only deaf person in my family. I became really good at face reading and lip reading. And when I went to college, I made the decision to learn American Sign Language. And so after college, I wound up at Gallaudet University so that I could pursue a degree in audiology. And that was the first time in my life where I met a lot of other people that were kind of like me, that were deaf and hard of hearing. And I learned how to really get a little bit more proficient at sign language. So today I am a pediatric audiologist in Northern Virginia, and I now have a cochlear implant in one of my ears. I'm married and I have a 12-year-old son who has normal hearing. I joined the board for Virginia Hens and Voices in 2017, and I am what we call the communications manager for our team, which means I handle all of Facebook and Instagram. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm going to move on over to Gideon.
Hello, Jill. That's a great introduction here, and thank you for welcoming me. My name is Gideon, and my sign name is G on the forehead. I am deaf, and I come from 4 generations of deaf family members on my mother's side. On my father's side, he was the only deaf of 6 children. He was the only one that was deaf. So while my father was being raised, he didn't really have any real communication. He had to depend on oral communication. He had really struggled. And he wasn't very successful with the oral method. He kept trying. He went to a deaf school in Fremont. And that's where he began to identify as a deaf individual, learn the language and pick the sign language up. And that's how he began to identify within himself as a deaf individual. And now he went there, but I can tell you, for me, oral is not a way to go for me. I just couldn't work with hearing aids or anything. For me, I love sign language and being able to communicate that way. Now, I am one of 4 children. I'm the second child. The first child and the 4th child in the family, though, are hearing. Let's see. I mean, we've been in, all kinds of worlds, with deafness, with spoken language. We've gone to Gallaudet, have degrees in biology and a minor in theater. And I just enjoy so many different things. And health communication specialties, working in the lab. I was a Fulbright scholar. I got a Fulbright scholarship. And I stayed in India for a month. And I just got back 2 months ago, back to America. It was an amazing experience. And in India, I studied sign language there for a month. There were many different people from many different backgrounds there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I am married to Colleen. We've been married for about 2 years now. She's a hearing interpreter. And I really just love analyzing language, getting into different languages, different people, different walks of life, learning how to understand each other. That's one of my passions. That's what I enjoy. So thank you, Jill, for having me here.
Thank you, Gideon. Oh, sorry, Laura. Let's go on to Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura. I was born deaf back in 1987. I started with sign language, and then hearing aids didn't work for me. So I switched over to a cochlear implant in 1990. And so then my parents decided to learn how to cue. And so I used that from, 3 years old until now. And I also I use a transliterator from preschool to the first year of high school, and I stopped. Um, right now I use American Sign Language, Key Speech, and spoken English. In fact, my husband is deaf. I'm deaf, and my daughter is deaf. And I'm also expecting a second child who will also be deaf or hard of hearing. So at home we use ASL, Key Speech, and spoken English. However, I got my second cochlear implant in 2008, because back in the day it was only one you can get two at the same time. It worked well for me. However, I know, like I said earlier, I used sign language for a while, and I stopped when I got my first cochlear implant because back in the day it was like you pick one and that was it. So I learned ASL in college because I wanted to work with deaf and hard of hearing children. So I became a teacher of the deaf. I did that for about 12 years. Right now I'm a stay-at-home mom because my daughter needs a lot of support, like audiology appointments, speech therapy, and I'm sure you all know this. And then, of course, with the second baby on the way, I'm going to be stuck doing this for a long time. So anyway, it's nice to be here with you all. I'm going to turn it over to Riley.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, Riley.
So I'm Riley. I was born with cytomegalovirus. That left me with a progressive hearing loss. So for my first 6-7 years of life, I had hearing aids, and I started using Key Speech in preschool, and I still use Key Speech to this day. By the time I was 7, I lost all my hearing, and then I got cochlear implant on my right side. And then I didn't get my second implant until I was in middle school, but unfortunately for me, it didn't work out as well with my second implant. So I really only just wear one. And I sometimes wore FMs back then, but I didn't really like them, so I didn't wear them. Yeah.
Thank you, Riley. Thank you. All right, so thank you guys for introducing yourself. I'm just going to go ahead and remind our participants that if they are here, to go ahead and turn their cameras off and mute their microphones, so that all we hear is just what's coming out of our panelist and my microphone. Okay, so if you have not muted your microphone, just go ahead and do that for me, please. All right. All right, it's time for our first discussion. So the first question we have this evening is, tell us about where you went to school, which some of you already did. Tell us about what accommodations you had to use in your school, and tell us about a time when you or your parent had to advocate for you in the educational setting. Does anybody want to tackle that first? All right, Laura.
I'll go ahead. I don't know if I said this earlier, probably didn't. I grew up in Maryland near Rockville, so I started in the deaf and hard of hearing program in elementary school, actually preschool. And then, from that time, from preschool to elementary, I was in the program. But I think around second grade, I was mainstreamed with some support with the deaf and hard of hearing teachers on site. And then middle school and high school, I went to my neighborhood school, and I had a cued speech transliterator from 6th grade to 9th grade. I had an IEP all the way just because I had support from the itinerant teacher of the deaf and an SOP. I use a lot of accommodations, like sitting up close to the teacher, asking for help. trying to remember, it's been so long. I don't know. It's been a long, long time, but using closed captions. But back in the day, as you know, many movies were not captioned until very recently. And my parents always had to advocate for me, especially when I was younger, because I was the first child who had a cochlear implant where I grew up in the school system. So it was very new. So my parents did have to advocate for all my accommodation. I really, back then, they tried to tell my mom, oh, no, she can't go into the mainstream. She needs to stay in the program. And my mom was like, no, she's ready. So that was a time when she advocated. I know when I got older, probably in middle school, or even fifth grade, I started advocating for myself, asking for more mainstream classes, reducing time with the teacher of the deaf, and the SOP. So really, they were always there to advocate. But I'm glad I learned how to advocate for myself at that time.
This is Gideon. So that question is very interesting for me because I never really had to ask for advocacy or really kind of extra accommodations like interpreters and that kind of thing because I went to a school for the deaf. So I grew up in California and later moved to Maryland, and I did attend to both deaf schools in both states. And I had full access to sign language in my environments growing up. So I never really thought of myself as different or deaf, like because I was around everyone else who was the same as me. So I know my brothers could speak and there were other people who spoke. But really, for me, I never really thought about like focusing on language development or socialization or vocational rehabilitation, that kind of exposure, like, and all the testing that deaf people have to go through when I was growing up, because I was in an environment that was all signing and I used sign language, I had access to everything around me. And I did take American Sign Language classes. Let me go back a little bit. So I am a native signer, meaning that I've been signing from the time I was born. I never really had to learn the language formally until I was like in middle school. And then we started learning grammar and that kind of thing. I started learning more about the structure of the language, syntax, like pronouns and the rhythm of a sentence and that kind of thing. And so, and how that maps onto the physical language. And so, but I've always been signing my whole life. And I've definitely been a self-advocate, particularly in IEP meetings when they're always talking with my parents about the kinds of things I might have been struggling with at school, et cetera. And my parents would talk with the teachers and the IEP coordinator, and they would all try their best, you know, to make sure I had the proper things I needed at school. But I never really, it was never a priority or a big issue that I had to struggle with advocacy, because I was really blessed to be in that kind of environment. And I did use interpreters later on during my education, once I was done with my primary schooling, for doctor's appointments, that kinds of things. When I would have appointments with different professionals, I would request interpreters for those. And it was a learning process for that. And then once I was in college, I had an internship where I had to work with an interpreter, and that's how I communicated primarily. But growing up, I never really thought of myself as someone who needed to do self-advocacy, really, until I was in the professional world. And that's where I really started to understand. But I never missed anything growing up. It was good because of my background, and I trusted that I was getting what I needed. But every once in a while, like later on, I would need an interpreter, or I might need like more explanation of language, like through gestures and that kind of thing. But that's my story.
So for me, I went to Canterbury Woods Elementary School, which had the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program here in Fairfax County. And I started there by the time I was 2 years old. And I learned how to cue, and I was mainstreamed, and sometimes I'd get pulled out for certain subjects like math or language arts. But for the most part, I was in the mainstream with the CLT with me every day. And I learned through like the teachers I had how to advocate for myself. Like they would give me the microphone and have me pass it on to the other teacher, or when we do small groups or just little projects, we would go out in the hall with my group, my partner, and we would work in the hall or another room, and I'll have my microphone with me. So they really taught me from a younger age how to start advocating for myself and to recognize what works best for me and to understand when am I hearing things and when I'm not hearing things. So that was a really big piece for me, was to understand, could I hear my group better if I was in the classroom or in the hall, which way worked best for me. And so I started really young with learning how to advocate for myself. But the biggest part of advocacy for me was just getting to know that I can speak up for myself and making sure I'm heard. And I remember when I was in middle school, it was hard because I had to wake up at 5:30 every day to go to middle school. It was an hour bus ride. And in 8th grade, I wanted to go to my base school for high school. And my mom was like all for it, but I was the one that she wanted me to tell the IEP team that I wanted to go to my base school and that I could handle it and that I was ready. And that was a big step for me to do that. And I remember that. It was a very intimidating meeting, but I did it. And so that was big. Oh, and accommodations I've used, like other accommodations when I was in college, it always varied depending on like the classroom environment I was in and situations I was in, and they were always really accommodating. I would have a CLT virtually. I would have a note taker, quiet testing centers and all that. So it's just always dependent on like what I needed and when.
I wanted to add just a little story here because Riley, you made me think about this. But I remember when I was in elementary school and I would get pulled out of classes to go see the therapist. And it was a person that would work with me on my listening skills. And I remember they would pull me out of my classes, and it was always my favorite subjects that they pulled me out of. And I just remember being pulled out of PE and art. I mean, those were the best subjects in school. And so I remember complaining to my mom that the school was pulling me out for the best subject, even though it was probably the most convenient time to pull me out. It was also my favorite part of the day. And I remember just getting really upset that was happening and I was missing out on all the fun. So my mom had to advocate for me and go to the school and tell them to stop doing that. That stuck with me a lot. It's kind of funny, but I wanted to be pulled out for my least favorite subject, like, math and reading and science. And so anyway, that was just kind of funny. All right, let's go to the second question here. All right, how can parents help empower their deaf or hard of hearing child, either socially, emotionally, and educationally? So we may have answered some of this already, but did you guys have anything that you wanted to add for that particular question?
Yeah, this is Gideon. I would like to emphasize something about my father. He's a big reason why I am who I am today. I am so grateful to my parents. They gave me language, and I never experienced any kind of language deprivation or interruption at home. I always would include it, and I was never left out or dismissed. I was just a regular kid in my family, and my mother as well. She was a big advocate for the deaf community. So like
Oh,
she was a deaf president now back in 1988. She was one of the 4 leaders, one of the 4 student leaders at that time. And so I've always looked up to my mother as an activist, as someone, you know, who's like a rule breaker and a visionary and who's leading deaf people. And, you know, she was always having to work under someone and never really recognized as a leader. And she had to break through all that, you know, and make sure people see her as a deaf person. And she showed me that as well for me, that you have to make people look at you. And that kind of attitude was very impactful for me, in that kind of mindset. Or if I don't want to just be stuck sitting like, oh, I'm deaf, I can't do anything. Instead, also, I don't want to sit around like feeling sorry for myself that I can't hear. There are so many different beautiful aspects of life beyond hearing and those senses. And so my parents gave that to me. And my father, he taught me to enjoy what I do have. Because my father, it was not easy for him during his life. And there were so many things that we were blessed to have, like access and that kind of thing. And I know that my parents wish that they had that. But they are a big driving force for me, and I'm so grateful for the 2 of them.
So just to add on what Gideon was saying, you know, I'm in your position now since I'm a mom of a deaf daughter and soon to be son who is also deaf or hard of hearing. Really what's important is the communication. Whatever communication you use, make sure they're included, and
yes.
just making sure they know their identity and supporting them with whatever they decide to do, whether if they use nothing, cochlear implants, hearing aids, ASL, speech, spoken language, doesn't matter. I mean, right now, what I'm seeing with my 2-year-old daughter, she'll be 2 next week. You know, I'm seeing that she really thrives with spoken language paired with sign language. You know, we use both at home, back and forth with some cueing support. But like I said, it's really important to make sure your child is a part of the conversation, you know, by providing the communication with whatever they prefer. Because it is really about the child. And I'm sure, as you know, as I mentioned, that I used to be a teacher of the deaf. And my thing was with my students was what works for them. And that's important.
So, my mom was the only one that actually learned how to cue, and she's honestly my best friend because her ability to communicate with me has always meant so much to me. Sometimes it'd be very hard for me in big family environments to communicate and feel like I'm a part of the family. So I would encourage families to just encourage their siblings to learn how to cue, sign, or just if they're just oral, just include them and make sure that they're part of the conversation and understand what's happening around them, because it can be hard to know that, like, when I was younger, I didn't necessarily understand and know that I was missing information, and I didn't know how to verbalize it when I was younger. It wasn't until later when I was in high school did I really was I able to advocate that side of myself, to express those needs to my family, because I didn't realize it before. I didn't realize that's what was missing. So just keep your eyes and ears out for any lost gaps of information, in communication and family, dinner tables or whatever. Just make sure that your child's included, and that itself means a lot.
I had a couple of thoughts here that I wanted
Gideon.
to mention. Oh, sorry. Does Gideon want to talk? All right, hold on.
Yes, I also wanted to add a comment as well. Speaking to all the parents. I mean, you might have very young children, or you might have older children. It doesn't really matter their ages. I'm just letting you know that it's what's important, what you must always, always include your children. It doesn't matter the communication method or style. It's your heart. Your children need to be able to see your heart clearly through you. They need to be able to communicate with you. It's so important for their future lives. And you want to make sure that your children see the effort that you're making. You know, sit with them as a family and friends. If you're all talking, make sure your child's not just sitting at the table going, hey, what's being said? What's going on? Feeling left out. It's a parent's responsibility to make sure that you let the other person say, hold on a second, and explain to your child what's being communicated, what's being said. Give them the opportunity to ask questions as well, to make sure that they can be involved with you and to know that they have this clear connection, that they are your child. They can see it in your eyes. That's what's so important, that they can connect with you.
This is Jill. Thank you for that. Gideon, you actually said exactly what I was going to say just a few minutes ago. So I'm glad you said it because I think parents, especially hearing parents that have a deaf or hard of hearing child, need to remember that nobody really wants to feel different. So it's really important as a parent that you just be really conscious of that. Like Gideon said, if you're at a table and there's people talking, find a way to include your child. Even your kindergartner can participate, you know, in the conversation, but you've got to be there to help them. And that means using the language or the communication method that that child has picked or that your family has picked. That also means making sure that you get everybody's attention and that your child has a chance to look at the person who is talking and realize who's talking. And yes, it does slow the pace down a little bit, but it's worth it in the long run. You've got to make sure that you turn down the background noise and that you slow your speech down just a little bit and that you just look at each other. And these are things that are just really going to help make environments comfortable for kids that are deaf and hard of hearing. And if you as a parent are just automatically doing that and everybody's doing it, then it's just going to be a comfortable environment to be in. So I think it's really important as parents that you just create a safe place for your child to be. Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's go into the third one. Okay, let's see here. I'm looking at the time. Okay, tell us about jobs that you had while growing up, accommodations that were needed, and the ways that you made deaf and hard of hearing friends.
This is more, this is kind of funny because growing up, you know, I did a bunch of little jobs. I started babysitting when I was 13. But in high school, you know, I went through this whole identity, I don't know what you call it, like shift, where it's like, I'm not deaf, I'm not, you know, signing, I'm not queuing or whatever. So I became a waitress for 2 years. I loved it. Really, I didn't use any accommodations other than having the we call it, clients or customers point out what they wanted, or I would repeat their order back to them. I also worked in real estate for a little bit. Again, you know, I would ask people to repeat themselves when needed. And then after college and grad school, I became a teacher. So I had a COT or ASL interpreter for meetings and whatnot. Other than that, that's how I function. And really, I didn't meet a lot of new deaf and hard of hearing friends until college, when I learned American Sign Language and then got involved in the deaf community. So, and it's kind of funny because I'm married to somebody who's deaf. So it's just a funny shift from, growing up deaf, not being really involved in the deaf community. And then as an adult, here I am.
This is Riley. So for me, I'm currently a teacher. And I didn't have any jobs before this. Worked in daycares and stuff like that, but I didn't really need accommodations. I was just working with babies and watching them when they sleep and feeding them when they were hungry, changing their diapers. Wasn't really doing much that required accommodations for that. So, but accommodations for, I started teaching, my first year of teaching was during COVID. Virtual year. That was extremely challenging, especially since all my students on my caseload had speech impediments. So not only were we like virtual, they had speech impediments, so I had a hard time reading their lips and understanding what their needs were and trying to gather data for their reading goals was really, really hard because I couldn't understand what they were saying, let alone understand what they were reading. So I was trying really hard to figure out ways to accommodate for my needs, and I did the best I could with like closed captioning on the computer and stuff like that. But so that was my first year teaching. And then I actually took a step back from teaching to become an instructional assistant while I went back to grad school to become a deaf ed teacher. Before the pandemic, I didn't think I was going to become a deaf ed teacher. It wasn't until the pandemic hit did I realize, oh, maybe I should go into deaf education. Maybe I should just go work with other kids who are like me, and I could just have better access to accommodations that work for me and for the other students. And so that's what I'm doing now. I work with the DHH preschool, Camelot Elementary School, and it has been a game changer in my life because I didn't realize how much I was missing. I didn't realize how much harder I had to work without the accommodations and how much I was compensating until I went to work at a school where I didn't have to work as hard, where everyone just understood that, like, oh, it's just that I couldn't hear that. It's fine. Like, I'll just repeat that again, or they can just cue it for me. And that was just a huge game changer for me. And now I'm actually looking for, I'm looking forward to the future and opportunities to work in other schools and hopefully like just be in the same environment with the other kids who are like me. So, yeah, and the best thing about like this job is just watching other kids who were like me and just watching them grow and develop the same skills that I did. And I'm still actually in touch with a lot of my friends from grade school who are also deaf, so I still have some connections from them too.
This is Gideon. I've got a lot of experiences here. My first experience with working, I was an intern in high school, and it was a biology lab internship. They were all hearing, and I was the only one signing. I mean, and I didn't speak. I had to write back and forth for my internship. So I had to write to communicate with them. They would speak and I would have to say, please, could you write it down for me? I had to build a relationship with them. My boss, my supervisor. It was going okay, but it was slow going. It wasn't really my best experience. So if asked if I could have an interpreter, moving forward, if they could sign. Oh, yeah, I'm asking the interpreter if you can follow me as the sign is fine. Yeah. Okay. I'm just checking. Okay. Anyway, I went to Gallaudet University, health communication class. It was really, school was really overwhelming, the education and everything, the terminology, the medical terminology, the science, all of that, and I hadn't had full access to all of that until I'd gotten into the university. And I had the interpreter there, and wow, once they brought in the interpreter, it's like became like my best friend having the interpreter there. There was so much more access and communication for me. And then also with the interpreter, I was able to learn how to communicate with the interpreters and how to navigate my way through the different challenges with the interpreter. And the interpreter was able to help me a lot with those challenges that arose. And then, like I said, I became a Fulbright scholar and I moved to India. My wife was my dependent, so she went with me and, asked if we needed accommodations for, as a deaf person, who should be the interpreter for it. But she'd had no plan for that. So my wife is a professional interpreter. So I decided, well, could I have my wife be there as the interpreter? And they were like, sure. So was able to give her a stipend that would help cover for her as well as she interpreted. And so when we had professional meetings, when we had interviews with hearing people, my wife could interpret for me perfectly. And that was just a really great experience. And I was able to communicate with deaf Indians there. And I learned Indian Sign Language. I was able to learn that and to use the ability to be able to accommodate them to accommodate me, and to be able to communicate and to navigate our way through using language and gestures, written notes, texting. So, now that I'm, working with hearing people, in the state of New York, let's see, Maryland, let's see some of the different areas, but like Virginia has as well. But some companies, it's been a long time where hearing and deaf people, hearing people have not even met a deaf people until they meet me. Right. And then the communication aspect. So it becomes really interesting. Like I'll have an app on my phone that I could use very quickly to be able to communicate, to put things down. I might have them speak into the microphone. It'll translate it so that then I can read it. And so I would speak it, they would speak into it, I could read it, and then I could, communicate back. So having this opportunity with like hands-on jobs and things has been really great. But there's been a lot that I've been able to do.
This is Jill. Thank you guys for answering that. I think I'm going to go ahead and move on to the fourth question because we only have about 15 minutes left. Okay, so the fourth question is, what advice or words of wisdom do you have for parents of young, deaf, and hard of hearing children today?
This is Laura. Really, in my experience as a teacher for deaf and now a mom of a deaf daughter, first of all, you know your children best. And looking at deaf education in general, I'm sure you all know there's a lot of bias, and there are different programs and whatnot. And I strongly recommend that you fight for what your child needs, because every deaf and hard of hearing child is different. whether they use ASL, key speech, and spoken language, or all three, it doesn't matter. And, making sure your child's a part of the family, with whatever communication modality they prefer. I wish my family did that. So again, you know your children best, advocate. Don't be afraid to say, no, that doesn't work for my child. We need this for him or her to be successful.
I also agree with everything that she said. I think for me, I would also just really encourage the communication and whatever modality that you choose, if it's key speech or if it's sign language, have your whole family learn how to sign, the siblings, the parents, grandparents, even, like, encourage them to learn how to cue or sign. And if you just, like, if that's what you choose, have the whole family participate. That makes a difference. And advocate, just advocate for your child and teach them how to advocate, because you know your child best and they're the ones that are going to need you. So just advocate, and don't be afraid to ask your child, what do they need? Maybe they know, maybe they don't know, but that's when you can work it out together. My mom sometimes would ask me, like, how can we help? How can I help you? How can we figure something out? If I didn't know the answer to that, she'd be like, that's okay. We can just try to figure something out together. So just, it's okay to not have the answers to everything. And it's okay for your child not to know everything either. That's when you can work it out together and just figure out what works best for your child. Because deafness affects each person individually differently. Not one hearing loss is the same, and how it affects you, the family, the child, is different. So everyone's experience is going to be different. So you just have to go with the journey and just keep rolling.
And Jill, do you mind repeating the question for me? I think I missed it. This is Gideon. You're muted, Jill.
Well, thank you. Sorry about that. So the question is, Gideon, what advice or words of wisdom do you have for parents of young deaf or hard of hearing children today? And if you want to think about it for a minute, that's fine, because I have something to say here. I kind of keep going back to, I love what Laura and Riley said. Every kid is different. And I had a big speech about that too, that I don't need to repeat. But, something that I just wanted to say for those of you that have kids who are wearing hearing aids or cochlear implants, I just really think today's generation, we do have a much wider acceptance of people having things on their ears. And I just, I know that for people like me growing up with hearing aids, life was really hard. But, because you were very isolated and you were seeing is very different. But I feel like part of the reason why we brought some younger people in tonight was because we wanted to show that, we also are just an evolving generation. And I think some of what you're seeing maybe today is that my hope is that some of the stigma of having hearing loss and having hearing aids is starting to go away. And particularly because of the introduction of just digital technology, because everybody has something on their ears now. And so I don't know if that's like really advice, but it's just something that when you grow up through the 80s and the 90s, and I'm here now, I'm a grown-up adult, and I've seen the difference and I've seen the evolution. And I you know, I just feel like our kids today have such a great opportunity to learn language in a way that, you know, a lot of us never did. So I hope that gives you some joy and some encouragement, in that, you know, you may not know the answers for your family now, but it's going to come over time. It's not something that happens overnight. But just know that, you know, we're all starting to wear stuff on our ears now. So hopefully some of that stigma is going to go away. Anybody else?
I just want
This is
one
Gideon.
more thing. Oh, sorry. You can go first.
Oh, Riley, you can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Riley, please.
Okay. Just piggybacking the advocacy, it doesn't just end at schools. It's also in the community. If your child is going to be part of like swim team, soccer, football, your job is to advocate for them there too. It's not just school. It's the whole community. I just wanted to clarify on that part. Just because when I was a child, I did swim team. I didn't have a cute speech interpreter there for me. I had to figure out how to navigate that whole world silently, learn how to swim silently. I managed to do it, but I think it would have been nice to have some of that in the community that I didn't have. But yeah, just advocacy doesn't come from home and school. It's like everywhere. The community too. So
Yeah, Riley, you said it beautifully. I just want to build off your comments there. Yeah, as a parent and you see your children growing up and socializing with other kids, they may see that they're a little different. They may not be as comfortable with everyone else. There's so much technology. There's so many accommodations. If you think about like, oh, well, you might think about they're less deaf or something like that, but you have to still try your best to invest in that kid and the community. Like Riley said, take an ASL class if that's what your child is using. As a parent, you go take the class as well. And just generally, there should be ASL classes for the peers of those children so that they can sign, because children love learning new things and they would love to be able to learn a new language to communicate with each other. And then they can figure out like, oh, I'm learning something new and it helps me communicate with you. And then I'd also like to add another important thing. Well, as your child grows up, please make sure that they find other deaf children, other deaf peers that they can socialize with and help them understand their identity and who they are through another person. It's like, oh, wow, I can't hear, you can't hear. Wow, we're the same. And you make that connection instantly when deaf people meet one another. And so you don't get to feel othered, you don't feel strange, you don't feel like there's something wrong with you. It's actually really cool. It's like, oh, we're special, we're really cool, and we're the same. And it's very empowering as well for those children to be able to interact with other children that they feel are the same as them. And another point I'd like to mention is art for your children. So like for me, I was interested in acting and storytelling. So that's something I enjoy very much. And growing up, my parents used to go to the theater and I was so excited, and I'm also looking forward for deaf children in the future, what opportunities they'll have for art. Because like art is expression, and maybe children aren't able to speak, they might have limited language, but if you give them a medium, some kind of art, there is no limit to what they can create. I think it's incredibly important that the socialization and artistic expression are very empowering for deaf children's success.
This is Jill. Thank you, guys. All of this was really, really good. I really, really appreciate you guys for saying everything you said. I have just a couple minutes here for any questions from the audience. I think we have one here, so let me just look at the chat. This is from Amanda, and it says, Gideon, so was college the first time that you worked regularly with an interpreter?
This is Gideon. Yeah, I'll answer. Yes, Amanda, you're right. So college, like my second year in the summer, I had an internship for 6 weeks. It was at the University of Maryland. And in the internship, I had to work with 6 interpreters. There were other deaf interns as well, so I wasn't the only one. But through those 6 weeks, I worked with several interpreters and communicated through them. So I learned a lot about communication during that time, because it was from occasionally using interpreters to constantly using interpreters. It was a switch, but yeah, that was the first time. And I loved it.
That's great. I don't see any other questions in the chat box from anybody. So if you had something you wanted to ask, you have just about 30 seconds to maybe get something in. Anybody? It's okay if there's not one. That means we did a really good job. Right? Okay. You know, at the end of this, really, I just wanted to close us out and just kind of reassure you parents that it's all going to be okay. You know, at the end of the day, at the end of the year, even at the end of high school, it's all going to be okay. Your child is going to be okay. Don't worry about getting it right overnight. It's over time. This is going to be something that just evolves. And when you get to the end of this, you're going to realize that the choices that you made in your family were probably the right choices for you and your child. So, you know, spend your time connecting your child with family members and friends and other people that are like him or her. Help them to like themselves. And, you know that all of us here who have hearing loss, we've all survived this, and we're all doing great, and we're all successful. And, you know, at the end of the day, we go back and we, you know, applaud our families for what they've done for us. So know that, you know, it's all going to be good. Okay. And thank you guys for the nice comments that you have here at the end. It was really lovely to do this. And I thank our interpreters, Tanya and Hidra, and also our transliterator, Angela. Thank you guys for being here. And also our panelists, thank you, Gideon and Laura and Riley. You guys, you know, this was really great. I really enjoyed this. It was so nice to hear from just a younger group of people. And I look forward to hearing from you guys again. All right. All right. Have a great evening and thank you for coming.
Thank you all so much. This is Gideon. I appreciate all of you. Thank you, the interpreters and transliterators, and I appreciate everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. I just put in the chat, I'm happy to answer questions later on as a parent and a teacher of the deaf.
Great idea. Yeah, feel free to, if you have any more questions you think of, you can always send it to Hands and Voices, and we'll be happy to send it on to the panelists. If you wanted a more individualized answer, we'd be happy to do that for you. Okay. Anything else? All right. Have a great night. Thank you for coming.